The next sub-assemblies, which I'm going to be working on, are the tank's rear grille work. The rear grille work is probably another one of the most important features found on the Tiger 1 kit, and the components you see here are all of the Armortek parts laid out. Now, it's also important to note that just like with many of the other components which were mentioned on this kit, the layout of the parts that you see here has stayed roughly the same for the subsequent releases of the Armortek Tiger 1 kit. They all have basically the same pattern and the same functionality. However, of course, what has changed is the medium that they are made in. The more recent renditions of the Armortek Tiger 1, these components here are made out of a single piece of CNC'd aluminum, rather than the white metal alloy which is found on these. As for the detailing, the parts do have the correct overall size and shape for that of the Tiger 1's grille work, and they have the fluid filler caps pre-molded in. The pieces are nice in quality, and these units here will be used on this build. However, they will be receiving a few tweaks and mods added to them to improve the detailing of the surface which is found on these pieces. As a close-up here, you can see the 3D printed print lines which are found on the parts. Now, the rear grille work sections that we have on either side are actually hinged and are designed to be fully functional, which is as per the real vehicle, and it's a nice feature that Armortek gives you. This is also true for the recent and the subsequent releases of the Armortek kit. Now, one thing that we can notice is that on this portion of the grille here, the builder went ahead and added a little bit of Bondo in order to deal with a small little sinkhole. This is a trait which I've noticed on many of this production version of the Armortek Tiger 1s. For some reason, there's a small divot on this hinge piece here. It's superficial and it's an easy piece to remove with bodywork, but it is something to be aware of when working with one of these older kits. Of course, when the pieces were switched to CNC, this is no longer a relevant issue. The first modification I'm going to be making to the grille work is I'm going to be deleting the molded in filler caps and replacing them with functional detail caps. For the functional detail caps, I'll be utilizing my resin sets from eastcoastarmory.com. These sets here are designed to be a drop-in installation for 1/6 scale Tiger 1 kits. On this case here, it's going to be utilized on an Armortek. However, they can also be utilized on the other 1/6 scale tanks on the market, namely that from the Tiger 1 from Field of Armor. In order to prep the grills for the installation of the ECA part, you first have to remove and delete the molded-in filler cap. The best way to delete the cap, I found, was with a hole saw. The hole saw that I am utilizing is the 1 1/8 inch or the 29mm hole saws, which are found in hardware stores. The hole saw will be mounted into a drill press, which gives you the best way of removing the component. If you don't have a drill press, you can still perform the operation. However, it's going to be a lot more difficult with the use of a hand drill. Now, because of the casted white metal alloy material that these components are made in, the drilling process goes by pretty quickly and without a whole lot of effort. Now, it's also important to point out that on the most recent release of the Armortek Tiger 1, kit number 131, that kit already has this procedure done to it, as the kit comes out of the box with the detail filler caps and the ECA sets are not necessary. And here I have the hole saw mounted inside of my large drill press, and I'm going to be drilling the hole. Now, for the grill section here, the hinge point, I will be utilizing a vise in order to hold it in place. And of course, when it comes time to mount it, you want to make sure that the drill bit is directly in the center of the hole to avoid any damage done to your vise. Simply line up the center portion of the filler cap, and I tighten the vise. With the vise now tightened, I'm going to go ahead and add a few little drops of oil to the center and of the circumference where I'm going to be drilling. This will help with the drilling process and will put less wear and tear on the bit and the cutter. Without further ado, I am now ready to start drilling. You will see that when I'm drilling this piece out, the center portion of the filler cap actually makes for a nice little convenient centering jig that allows the bit to drill directly true into where it needs to be. Just a few taps with the handle, and presto. And there we go. The grills are now ready to have their detailing added. And here are the grills now fully reworked and are ready for their coat of yellow, to which then they'll be installed to the vehicle. Starting with the hinge plate, the hinge cover that we have here, besides the addition of the ECA filler cap cover, which was mentioned earlier, the entire surface has been coated with the cast texturing. Cast texturing greatly improves the look compared to the stock 3D printed crosshatch type pattern which was seen in the earlier scenes. The ECA piece has been thoroughly blended into the component and is a nice seamless addition. Other than that, the piece is basically left stock. I did have to go ahead and adjust the hinge portions here with a little bit of fine tuning and hand fitting so it properly mates with the hinge section of the grill. Since these components are made out of a softer white metal, the sanding and removing of the material that was found is actually a pretty simple procedure and gets done with not a whole lot of effort. It's a mirror image on the opposite side when it comes to the mods that were made. Moving to the main grills, just like with the other parts, the ECA filler cap mod was done to them. In addition to that, I went ahead and did the same type of mod that I made to the late production Tiger, which is found on my video listings as well. And there I go into more detail about what these grills need to have done to them in order to really make them stand above the pack. In a nutshell, the Armortek kit, the grills, and this is true for the first pattern all the way up to the current patterns, they're a lot shorter than they would be on the real Tiger 1. On the real German tanks, these grills are a lot thicker in cross-section compared to what is found rendered on most model kits, the Armortek included. What I went ahead and did was I doubled up the layer of the grill section with a resin insert. The resin insert is a direct match for the Armortek grill pattern, so when it gets mounted on, the piece is seamless and you can't really see where the two halves were joined. In addition to that, I went ahead and added the separations which are found on the Tiger 1 grills. The Tiger 1 grill work is not all plugged together, and these two sections here and the section in the center do not make contact with the frame. In addition to those mods, cast texturing was added to the surface of the grill cover itself, and most notably one can clearly see is the really rough cast texturing that was added to the sections in between the grills. Now, the real Tiger 1, as well as all of the German tanks with these pattern grills, is true for the Panther, the King Tiger, as well as the Jag Tiger. Their grills are actually very roughly casted. I've seen this in person, and I've even touched the grills in person on several versions of the Panther, as well as even the Jag Tiger, which was at Aberdeen for a period of time. Those grills are very roughly pitted, with that of the sand texture from when the pieces were casted at the foundry. Which is kind of funny because the Germans have this knack of having really high quality components, and their tanks are supposed to be very highly polished, and these grills that you see here in person are actually very more reminiscent to that of the Russians in terms of casting quality. Pieces themselves are fine, but it's just seeing them in person is a lot more raw and rough compared to what we've all seen on smaller scale models. On this 1/6 scale model here, as well as many of my other 1/6 scale Tiger ones, I went ahead and added this little detail feature, which does greatly help the accuracy of the piece, and definitely is one that is commonly overlooked by just about all the other modelers out there. As for how I added the cast texturing, that is proprietary, and I'm not going to go ahead and say how I added the texturing to these pieces here. However, I will say that the texturing was done to both of the main engine grills, as well as the hinged grills as well. While on the fan grill covers, the mods that went into this are basically mirrored of the mods that went into the main grills. This would include the cast texturing around the edges, as well as the very rough cast texturing inside the bricks. The pieces have also been added in thickness. And on the fan covers, you'll see there's a small little nub molded into the bottom portion. This nub here is a carryover from the initial Tiger design, in which on the initial pattern of Tiger 1, when the tank was first developed, there was supposed to be a pneumatic ram that was supposed to open up the grill covers in order for more air to go into the radiator for the cooling. This system was never adopted and was dropped early on. However, this little nub here persisted on all of the castings and was found on a large number of the Tiger 1s, all the way up until the mid and maybe even into some of the later production units. This tank being an early production Tiger, this nub here should be found on these pieces. Now here go the grills during their installation. Now currently I have the two main grills mounted on with that of the fasteners, as I mentioned before. And before I go ahead and mount on the second half of the grills, I wanted to take a time and show a little bit of tweaking I had to do to them. Okay, first, because of the extra grill width that I added to the hinged portion, I needed to remove a little bit more material than I removed before. Due to the way they sit in the closed position, the grill actually made contact with this portion here of the metal frame, so a portion of which was deleted. This was true for both sides. With the pieces touched up, they are now ready for the installation. Now as for the grill hinged portions themselves, as you can see, they are hinged and operate very smooth and effortlessly. This was because of the little bit of material that I removed from the hinge sections, which I mentioned before. Now when it comes to the pinning, this also helps with the actual smoothness of the piece. The Armortek kit supplies the hinge with a single steel rod that goes from one end to the other. Now the problem with this is that the holes that are drilled into the casting are slightly off center. So if you try to nail in the hinge piece, it's going to be difficult to get it all the way in. And once in, the piece is going to be very, very stiff with opening because the hinge portions have trouble lining up. What I did on this piece here is that I went ahead and used 2 pins instead of 1. The stock Armortek pin was cut in half, and the pin emerges into this hinge here, and only emerges about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch into the center hinge. This is true for both sides. Because of this, it is firmly held in place and it's not going to fall out, but since the holes are lined up properly on those 2 ends, the piece opens up nice and fluidly. If you notice, even at the hinge portion here, which if the hinge was not expanded, you're going to have material being removed in these sections, which can possibly hurt the look of the tank depending how many times you open the hinge. As you can see, I can open it all day and no paint gets worn off, as at this point now they can get bolted to the tank permanently. And here's the rear of the tank now with the grill work components fully installed. Of course, like everything on this tank that's installed with fasteners, red Loctite was utilized to keep everything firmly in place as the tank drives and as well as it ages. Outside of the modification that I made to the rear deck with opening up the recesses in order for the fans to fit better, the installation of the grills were pretty straightforward. The holes all lined up pretty well and the installation was very smooth. With the components now installed, you can see how the hinged portions of the grill actuate. Like what was showcased earlier, they open nice and fluidly and don't have any hiccups in regards to making contact with anything else. With them in the open position, you can get to appreciate the modification that I made to making the grill work thicker, as well as the fan detailing that I mentioned earlier. Now, it's important to point out that this tank will be receiving a FIFO system. With the FIFO system installed, opening up this portion here of the vehicle will not be done very often, or if hardly ever. However, it is a nice feature that is built into the Armortek kit. Now, one design flaw that these German tanks of World War II had was with the shape and size of the grillework. As you can see, with these large, big slots, it does help with the coolant of the radiator, as it does help draw in a lot of air. However, a side effect is that with these large gaping holes, it is very easy to get foreign objects into this location, or even worse, into this location here where you have the exposed fans. This was quickly addressed, and the Germans came up with a screen type system which covers up these locations here, which allow air to flow into the system, but the screen is fine enough to prevent any type of foreign objects, either intentional or accidental, to fall into this location. As we all know, this would be a really bad location to get a hand grenade or even a Molotov into these grills, which is directly below the fuel tanks. Definitely not beneficial. To alleviate the issue with the large screen gaps found on the grillework, the Germans developed the system that we have here. The system consists of two sizes of mesh. First, we have a very fine mesh with a very tight weave. And then we have, in a big box frame, a larger weave of mesh. The larger mesh is found on all of the grillework, namely the two main grills and the two fan grills. As for the thinner mesh, this is only found on the larger portions of the grill and are absent on the thinner ones. As for these actual components that you see here, these here were acquired by the owner of the vehicle when he was acquiring all the parts for the tank back about 10 years ago. These parts here were acquired from 6-scale icons. 6-scale icons is very heavily known in the 1/6 scale armor modeling racket, and what that guy had was a large assembly of parts specifically for German tanks, and what made his parts all unique is that they were all in metal and photo etch. Now, unfortunately, 6-scale icons has ceased operations back in around 2013 or so due to the death of the company's owner. However, all of the rights for these components were sold to Field of Armor. As for if these pieces are in production or not, that information would be best by contacting Field of Armor through the email address listed below. Taking a look at the 6-scale icons components, you can see that the components are made of brass as well as copper. The copper weave found on the meshwork is very nicely done and very closely resembles that of the actual Tiger. You can see that, unlike with photo etch where it would be flat, on the 6-scale icon piece it actually has the correct weave pattern, and if you notice the valleys and mountaintops found on the mesh itself. You can see how the frame was fabricated, how it was all crimped together and soldered. Very high quality component. As for the fan grill, basically the exact same type construction. However, what is missing and has to be done by the builder is the little cutout for the hatch retaining latch, which is found on this portion of the grill. The smaller weave is also supplied with was supplied with the 6-scale icon set. The weave itself is basic screen like you would find on a screen door, and is made of aluminum or some kind of a metal alloy. Now, it is missing the little U cutout here that is for the filler cap, but obviously this is not too difficult to add by the builder. Now, as nice as this set is, it's also important to point out that these sets here are really no longer necessarily needed on the current generation of Armortek tanks, as on the Armortek releases now, these components kind of come with the kit. And what I mean by kind of come with this kit is what I have here. This here is the fret of photo etch, which is supplied with the current generation of Armortek kits. The components are the same basic idea. They're all made of photo etch. In fact, if anyone is used to working with the smaller scale Tiger 1 kits in 1/35 scale or even 1/16 scale, this set here looks exactly familiar, as it's basically the same type of idea. Now, the difference between the Armortek supply component and the 6-scale icons is with the weave. With the 6-scale icons, you actually have the real meshwork, while on the Armortek component, it is flat photo etch. Now, the Armortek piece is a very nicely done thing, and one advantage that it has over the 6-scale icons version is the fact that it has small little tabs where you can bend and fold it to better fit the grill. On the 6-scale icons component, it's going to be a little bit more trickier for the installation, and also it's trickier with sandwiching of the finer weave underneath. What's required next is for me to mark and remove the sections for the hatch retaining latches, and then these components here are all going to get into primer and base coat. Once that's concluded, they will be installed to the tank's grill work. And here go the grills now with the grenade mesh added. As you can see, like I said before, only the main intake grills have the smaller weave in addition to the thicker weave, while the two on the back are absent. If I take the camera off the tripod, you get a good look of what the meshwork looks like now fitted to the vehicle. Now, on the real vehicles, I believe that these may have been spot welded to the grills, and by the next video update, you're going to have several spot welds sculpted onto these components here. As for mounting the mesh to the model, this is done with several small wire brads, which are drilled into the mesh and into the grill and are kept in place with adhesives. The small little pins will blend into the surface of the vehicle once everything is fully painted and weathered. With the grills out of the way, I am now focusing the rest of my effort onto the tank's engine hatch and engine hatch hinge, which I have here partially completed. More information on that is to follow in the next video update. And with that, that concludes this project update video for this vintage Armortek German World War II early production Tiger 1. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, where there are more photographs of this build that are constantly being posted. And don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. Thanks for watching.